twins looked exactly the same, but they couldn't have been more different. One was loved by everyone, known for his kindness, while the other was feared for his reckless and wild behavior. When a shocking murder shook their quiet town, both brothers became suspects, and the truth became impossible to see. As Detective Sarah Grant worked to uncover who was guilty, the twins played a dangerous game, using their identical faces to confuse her. But this wasn't just about solving the murder. Sarah soon realized her own life might be at risk if she didn't figure out their deadly secret in time. The body of Richard Carter, a wealthy philanthropist and respected member of the community, was found in his upscale suburban home on a quiet Monday morning. The discovery sent shockwaves through the town. Carter was known for his generosity and commitment to social causes, so the brutality of the crime seemed unthinkable. He had been stabbed multiple times, the attack both frenzied and deliberate. Blood splatter coated the room, but no sign of forced entry was evident. Whoever had done this had either been invited in or had a key. Detective Sarah Grant was called to the scene immediately. Her reputation for solving even the most complex cases preceded her, but something about this murder struck her as different from the outset. The scene was both chaotic and chillingly deliberate. It was clear the killer had a motive and a plan, but had left behind enough evidence to make Sarah suspect they wanted her to find something. Or at least think she had. Amid the scattered clues, one item stood out. A locket found clutched in Richard's hand, its chain broken. Blood was smeared across its surface, suggesting a struggle. Inside the locket was a photograph of two identical boys, smiling as though they hadn't a care in the world. The image was old but unmistakable. It was Mark and Luke Harding, a pair of identical twins known for their starkly different reputations. Jessie wondered. Sarah quickly learned the twins both had ties to the victim. Mark Harding was as a community darling, often praised for his charitable work and close partnership with Richard on various social initiatives. Luke, on the other hand, was the town's black sheep, notorious for a string of petty crimes and an unpredictable temper. Recently, Luke had been fired from a job at one of Richard's companies. After a public altercation, the connections were glaring, but the evidence remained circumstantial. When Sarah questioned the twins, their differences became glaringly obvious. Mark was polished, calm, and cooperative. He expressed shock and sadness at Richard's death, insisting he had no knowledge of why someone would want to harm him. His alibi was simple. He had been home reading a book. Luke, however, was agitated and defensive, accusing Mark of hiding something. His alibi was just as shaky. He claimed to have been drinking alone at a bar, but no one could verify his presence there. As Sarah dug deeper, the complexity of the case grew. The twins' identical appearances made physical evidence nearly useless, and their contrasting personalities painted each as equally suspicious. The locket, an object that should have brought clarity, only deepened the mystery. Why had Richard been holding it? Was it torn from the killer's neck during the attack, or had it been planted to mislead investigators? The situation grew even darker when Sarah began receiving cryptic notes. The first arrived on her desk, its message ominously simple. The truth isn't always what it seems. With no return address and no fingerprints on the paper, it became clear that this was no ordinary case. The stakes were rising, and Sarah felt the weight of the growing tension. Little did she know, the real game was just beginning. As the investigation unfolded, Sarah realized she was dealing with more than just a murder case. This was a psychological battlefield. The twins, Mark and Luke Harding, seemed to relish the opportunity to confuse and manipulate her. Both provided conflicting stories during questioning, each brother carefully planting seeds of doubt about the other. Their narratives were intricately designed, leading Sarah in circles. Mark portrayed himself as the moral compass of the family, a selfless man devoted to charity and community work. He painted Luke as a volatile and dangerous individual who had always resented him for his success. Mark even suggested that Luke had been jealous of his close friendship with Richard and that it was only a matter of time before Luke lashed out violently. Luke, however, spun a very different story. He accused Mark of being a master manipulator who had spent his entire life hiding his true nature behind a polished facade. According to Luke, Mark had everything to gain from Richard's death, particularly after Richard had removed him from a major charity project due to suspected financial mismanagement. Luke insisted that Mark's calm demeanor was nothing more than a mask to hide his sinister intentions. While both brothers' accounts were compelling, neither had solid evidence to back their claims. Sarah's team uncovered a bloody knife in a park near Luke's home, but the fingerprints on the weapon matched Mark. This seemed damning until CCTV footage surfaced, showing a figure resembling Luke driving toward Richard's house on the night of the murder. The contradictions were endless, and Sarah began to suspect that at least one of the twins was deliberately planting evidence to confuse the investigation. Meanwhile, the cryptic notes continued to arrive. The messages were chillingly personal, often referencing private details about Sarah's life that no one should have known. The handwriting on the notes didn't match either brother, adding another layer of mystery. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. One night, as she walked to her car after a late shift, she discovered it had been vandalized. 150 leafs. They took the purse and every treasure and scoured the house, but there was nothing of interest. Scratched into the paint were the words, "You're next." Fear rippled through her, but she was determined not to let it distract her from the case. As Sarah delved deeper, she uncovered a troubling pattern in the twins' behavior. Both had a history of psychological manipulation, using their identical appearances to deceive others. Childhood pranks had evolved into more sinister schemes as they grew older. Mark and Luke seemed to share a twisted bond, one that thrived on competition and cruelty. It was becoming increasingly clear that this wasn't just a case of one twin framing the other. It was a carefully orchestrated game, and Sarah was the unwilling pawn. Despite the mounting pressure, Sarah refused to back down. She knew the twins were testing her, and she was determined to win. But as the web of lies grew thicker, she couldn't shake the feeling that the stakes were far higher than she had initially realized. The deeper Sarah dug into Mark and Luke's past, the more disturbing their story became. The twins had grown up in a seemingly idyllic household, but interviews with neighbors and old acquaintances painted a different picture. Their father had been a strict and controlling man who pitted the boys against each other, fostering a deep rivalry that persisted into adulthood. Mark, the golden child, could do no wrong, while Luke was frequently blamed for every mishap. One particular incident stood out during Sarah's investigation. As teenagers, the twins had been involved in a scandal that divided their small community. A neighbor's dog had gone missing and was later found injured in the twins' backyard. Luke was blamed and punished after Mark testified against him, claiming he had seen Luke lure the dog away. However, years later, another neighbor came forward, saying she had seen Mark with the dog that day. The accusation was dismissed as unreliable hearsay, but it left a stain on Mark's seemingly spotless reputation. Sarah also discovered that Mark and Richard's friendship had been more complicated than it first appeared. Emails between the two revealed that Richard had begun to distrust Mark in the months leading up to his death. Richard had quietly removed Mark from a major charity project, citing financial discrepancies and ethical concerns. Mark's responses were polite on the surface, but carried a thinly veiled resentment. Luke's history, while less polished, seemed too chaotic to be part of a calculated plan. He had a record of petty thefts, bar fights, and reckless behavior, but none of his prior actions suggested the level of premeditation required for Richard's murder. Still, his volatile personality made him an easy target for suspicion. It was almost too convenient, Sarah thought, as though someone had designed the narrative to fit Luke perfectly. The case took another turn when Sarah uncovered an old journal belonging to their late mother. The entries were sparse, but one passage stood out. She had written about her fear of Mark's ability to manipulate those around him, even as a child. "Mark always knows what to say, how to act," one entry read. "Sometimes I wonder if even I can see the real him." As Sarah pieced together the fragments of their past, she began to see a chilling pattern. Mark and Luke's rivalry had escalated over the years, evolving into a game of one-upmanship that blurred the lines between right and wrong. Both brothers were capable of cruelty, but only one had gone so far as to commit murder. The more Sarah uncovered, the more she realized how deeply entrenched she was in their game. The twins had spent their entire lives mastering the art of deception, and now they had turned their skills on her. Time was running out, and Sarah knew that every decision she made could either bring her closer to the truth or make her the next victim. With the investigation in a stalemate, Sarah decided it was time to take a calculated risk. The twins had successfully manipulated her and the evidence, but she knew one of them had to crack under pressure. She staged a press conference, announcing that her team had found new evidence tying the murderer directly to the crime scene. This was a bluff, a trap designed to provoke a reaction from the guilty party. The announcement was widely covered in the media, and Sarah's gamble paid off when she received a new note that same night. This note, more threatening than the previous ones, warned Sarah to drop the case or face dire consequences. Unlike the earlier cryptic messages, this one was emotionally charged and written in haste. Sarah had the handwriting analyzed and compared to samples collected from both Mark and Luke. Surprisingly, the handwriting matched Mark's. When confronted, Mark didn't panic. He calmly denied writing the note, suggesting that Luke had forged it to frame him. He pointed out that his brother had always been skilled at copying others. Luke, on the other hand, exploded in anger when presented with the note. He accused Sarah of falling for Mark's manipulative tactics and claimed his brother was playing everyone, just as he had their entire lives. "He's always been the good one, right?" Luke had said during questioning. "Good at lying. Good at making people think he's perfect. But trust me, he's not." Despite the note implicating Mark, Sarah couldn't ignore the inconsistencies in Luke's behavior. The bloody knife with Mark's fingerprints seemed almost too perfect a piece of evidence, as if someone had deliberately planted it to create a trail. Meanwhile, the sect footage showing Luke driving near Richard's house added weight to his brother's prayers. It was becoming clear that both twins were playing a dangerous game of chess, using Sarah as an unwitting pawn. As Sarah reviewed the evidence, she stumbled upon a breakthrough. A hidden camera installed in Richard's study had recorded footage of someone entering the room shortly before the murder. The figure's face was obscured by shadows, but their build and movements bore an uncanny resemblance to Mark. Yet, the person wore clothing that Luke had described himself wearing that night, a curious and deliberate detail. It was another layer of the twins' twisted game, designed to sow confusion and doubt. Sarah's unease grew when she discovered that someone had been tampering with her office files. A technician confirmed that her computer had been accessed remotely, likely by someone with advanced technical skills. She began to suspect that Mark, with his polished demeanor and network of resources, might have been manipulating the investigation from the start. Feeling the walls closing in, Sarah redoubled her efforts. She combed through every piece of evidence, searching for the thread that would unravel the truth. The twins had built an intricate maze of lies, but Sarah was determined to find her way out, even if it meant risking her own life. As the case reached its breaking point, Sarah revisited the locket found at the crime scene. It had been a curious detail from the start, and she was convinced it held the key to solving the mystery. A forensic team reanalyzed the locket and found a faint fingerprint on the inner clasp marks. When Sarah confronted him with this evidence, Mark remained calm and unbothered, insisting that the locket had been planted to implicate him. Luke, however, reacted differently. He broke down during questioning, accusing Mark of orchestrating everything. "He's always been 2 steps ahead," Luke sobbed. "I've spent my whole life being blamed for things he's done. Why would this be any different?" Despite his outburst, Luke's history of lying and impulsive behavior made it difficult to take his confession at face value. The investigation took a shocking turn when Sarah discovered Mark's journal hidden in his home. The entries detailed his deteriorating relationship with Richard and hinted at a carefully planned murder. Mark wrote about feeling betrayed by Richard's decision to remove him from the charity project, which had tarnished his spotless reputation. The entries also revealed Mark's resentment toward Luke, whom he described as a useful scapegoat. Armed with this evidence, Sarah arrested Mark and charged him with Richard's murder. The media hailed her as a hero for cracking the case, but the victory felt hollow. The twins' twisted dynamic had left her emotionally drained, and she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Her suspicions were confirmed when, during the trial, Luke confessed to the murder. He claimed he had killed Richard in a fit of rage after a drunken argument. Despite the overwhelming evidence against Mark, Luke insisted he had acted alone. His confession was convincing enough to sway the jury, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Sarah was left reeling. She knew Luke's confession didn't align with the meticulous planning evident in the crime. It was clear he was taking the fall for his brother, driven by a toxic loyalty forged over a lifetime of manipulation and rivalry. Mark walked away free, his reputation tarnished but his life intact. Months later, Sarah received one final note. Unlike the others, this one was handwritten and signed. It read, "Goodness is just another mask. You were right all along." The signature at the bottom was Mark's. The realization hit Sarah like a thunderbolt. Mark had been the mastermind all along, orchestrating every detail, including Luke's confession. He had won the game, escaping justice while ensuring his brother paid the price. For Sarah, the case was over, but the scars it left behind would haunt her forever.